This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. This is Python's Paradise, your film and music show, and this is your host, Greg Gilbert, aka the Python Hyena. And folks, Clerks is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. And I had the pleasure and honor of having Marilyn Gigliotti on here back in April with her fire extinguishers and her nail polish and her lasagna and all that stuff. Well, guess what else? We understand that Chuli's Gum is celebrating 25 years too. And we got the representative of Chuli's Gum on the phone granting us an interview today. Folks, I give you the wonderfully talented and also musically driven Scott Schiaffo. How do you do, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Greg.
Yes. Clerks celebrating its 25th anniversary, and it's shot in black and white. Looks very simplistic and yet very effective. What do you think about that film's run for 25 years?
Well, it's the kind of thing that nobody would have any idea at the time. As an actor, all the projects I work on, I treat pretty much just as professionally as any other project, no matter what the budget, no matter what's happening. If I, say yes and enjoy the script and have a faith in the director, it's all good. But you could never, ever foresee something like this because it requires time and it requires the supporters of the film to sort of grow along with it. And it also required Kevin to continue his universe. So, none of us at the time could have ever known, but it's a wonderful, wonderful thing for especially me. My dream was to be a successful character actor in indie film, and I got a very wonderful gift with that role because the Chuli's Gum guy was really written to stand out.
Yeah, do you get recognized a lot just on the streets for playing that role?
Not per se, but it depends. I mean, it depends on the scenario. Of course, when we're in a situation like a convention appearance, you're there for a specific reason, so everyone knows. But it's pretty anonymous in a day-to-day sort of scenario. For a long time, I didn't. In fact, for a long time before the film and then a long time after the film, I did not go around with facial hair. I was clean-shaven. I grew that specifically for the role, which is really funny, too, because had I known it really was going to have the amount of outreach that it did have, I probably wouldn't have grown the beard because, there I am in a film that gets probably the most widely seen film I'm in, and I'm sporting a look that I didn't particularly go around with. But it happened, I don't want to say a lot, but it happened when the film first was released, and it had a very long run in New York at the Angelica Film Center, which is right around the corner from NYU. Mm-hmm. And the NYU film students really embraced that movie. And they would go every weekend, literally, it would sell out every weekend at the Angelica Film Center in New York with NYU film students who just loved it. And down in the Lower East Side, where I used to do a lot of my auditioning and more or less socializing too and networking, I began to get people would recognize the voice before they recognized me by appearance, again, because I was clean-shaven after the movie.
Yeah. So how's the Chuli's Gum thing going? Selling much of that?
I always thought it was really clever how it's actually remembered as, somebody who's, you think he's an advocate or he's staunchly against smoking. He really doesn't care if you smoke as long as you chew the gum. He's quite duplicitous as far as a character. But I was just talking to somebody the other day about this because Harvey Weinstein has been such a horrible character in the news over the last year or two. But
yep.
when the film was first screened with Harvey in the audience, Harvey ran out of the theater after the Chewlie's Gum Guy scene. He was that angered by it and put off by it because he was like a chain smoker at the time. And I always thought it was kind of funny how, he almost sort of wrote the film off as a result, but then his brother and a number of other people said, listen, Harvey, you're being ridiculous. Sit through the whole film. It's a wonderful film. This Kevin Smith is really a fantastic writer. But he really took exception to the Chewlie's Gum Guy scene, and now I'm glad because of what we found out about him, I'm kind of glad I got in his crosshairs. But it's a funny story now, but certainly what's going on with him isn't funny.
Nope, not at all. Yeah, he really screwed the pooch, and there was he was involved with Pulp Fiction and Clerks, two of the most notable, if not the most notable, cult films of 1994.
Yeah, and then subsequently, I mean, a huge chunk of Kevin's films from that era were Miramax, and certainly Fleck and Damon, were so many people were sort of part of the Miramax, if you want to call it a family, or the Miramax catalog of films in the 90s. And meanwhile, what's going on behind the scenes is just horrific, and it's really sad. A lot of people ended up sort of guilty by association, which isn't fair, but at the same time, it's understandable because there were people like the Flecks and Damon and a number of people, actors primarily, Quentin, director, who had an inkling that Harvey was not on the up and up. I don't think any of them knew on the level he was, how horrible it really did get. But he did have a reputation in the inside, behind the scenes. They knew he was sort of manipulative with the women, I'll say. But I guess nobody knew just how horrible it had gotten. But it's just a terrible, terrible thing when you think about it. I mean, it's just like with Kevin Spacey. I mean, as an actor, I loved him. And then after all that had come out about him, it really taints the catalog. It's hard to watch those movies and feel sort of okay about it again or good about it again. It's really sad.
Well, with Harvey, Brad Pitt did stand up to him, apparently, over Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah, I mean, there were people along the way. I mean, it's, I don't know how, I don't want to say it's hearsay, but when Rose McGowan came out and talked a lot about her experiences, she had spoken to, I think, Ben Affleck about it, and Ben's reaction, according to Rose McGowan, was something like, "Oh, that Harvey, I told him to cut that out." And when you hear that many years after the fact, that's not the greatest sort of reaction in a sense. And I love Ben. I mean, I love all those guys. I mean, I love actors. I really do. But when you hear these kind of things, you wonder, what could they have done too with such a powerful man who really held a lot of the, he pulled all the strings for a lot of people's careers.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of are in a place of fear. You're in a place of, it's not my business. He hasn't done anything terrible to me, so I better keep my nose out of it. And you end up with a really horrible scenario. You end up with a culture of people who are sort of staying quiet about it, and meanwhile it continues, and it's tainted such a huge chunk of the 90s films, because Miramax was, responsible for so many wonderful films. I mean, it doesn't take away the art of the film and all the hard work that went into those films, but you can't help but wonder what went on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, Brad Pitt, I don't think had to worry about Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, no, certainly. Many of those guys who really escalated, they might have had Harvey to thank early on, like Kevin certainly did. I mean, the Weinsteins really did help him mold the first 10 years of his career, more or less. But it's just unfortunate. And I didn't mean to. I hope I didn't take us off on a
Oh,
bummer.
no. Go for it.
It's just that recently he came up in the news here in the New York area because I don't know if you saw it by you, but he was at some function and people were reacting and flipping out, and one woman really had a clip go viral where she really flipped out, and it made the major news here, and it just brought it up again, and I ended up in a discussion with somebody about, hey, Harvey does know who the Julie's Gum guy is, and he was not a fan. He really hated that scene so much to where he ran out of the theater, which I thought now it's amusing to me,
Yeah, well, you know what? He should be afraid of the Julie's Gum guy, and he should be afraid of Marilyn with the fire extinguisher.
Right.
Yeah. And as far as Kevin Spacey goes, I still like his talent. I loved American Beauty, loved L.A. Confidential, and various other things he's done. Horrible Bosses.
Usual Suspects.
Yeah. I don't know. I can still watch those. Some people feel different, but I can still watch those. Like.
Yeah, I can.
Mm-hmm.
But it does change it on some level. You can't have you no longer that what's the terminology, or what's the old willing suspension of disbelief you need to have when you watch a piece of art, meaning you give yourself to it and you allow it to become for the hour and a half sort of real, in a sense. You go with it. Yeah. It takes you out of it. Instead of seeing the character, you see a guy who was a real creep.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little hard, but certainly it doesn't destroy all the good that's there. Not unlike, well, I don't know. You get somebody like a Bill Cosby. I mean, I grew up with his records.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm a little. I'm probably older than a lot of people realize, because I was older than a lot of the folks in the cast of Clerks. So I grew up with Bill Cosby records as a child, because his records were pretty much universal, and they were child friendly or safe because there was no language. They were just funny without any provocative language or whatever. And then he turned out to be another monster.
It's funny how he would criticize Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor for their style of stand-up, and then look at him.
Oh, God, and not just that, but he would also, that went on beyond just the stand-up community. He really gave it to all the hip-hop guys with the pants down and the calling women hoes and whatever the slang was within the hip-hop culture. He had a lot to say about that, and meanwhile, these guys are just rapping about it, and meanwhile, Cosby himself is literally abusing women.
Yep.
So it is. It's ironic, and it's like a vicious Saint Bernard.
Yep, like Cujo. Well, I've interviewed a couple people from American Beauty and L.A. Confidential, so it takes a little different stance for me. I haven't interviewed Kevin Spacey, but nonetheless. But here we are 25 years later at Clerks and Julie's Gum. Now, I take it that's something Kevin came up with, huh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Kevin, anything in a Kevin Smith movie is 99.9% from Kevin's brain and his wonderful writing, right up into, the first handful of films he did. He really would not allow any deviation from the script, because his words and the way he wrote it and the way he would hear it meant so much to him. So yeah, I mean, every last syllable was all from Kevin. We didn't really have any room to embellish or improvise, and you know, the stuff is so wonderful as it is. You don't really need to.
Yeah, it's funny because he would do his own thing up until Cop Out. And Cop Out was supposed to be a wonderful experience until he met one of his heroes, Bruce Willis, which turned out to be a not so fun experience for him.
Yeah, I tell you, that's another thing. Most actors my generation, we grew up watching his career flourish, Bruce Willis, and really enjoying him and really feeling like here's another, you know, salt of the earth Jersey guy who made it, who's very talented, who's hilarious, he's good at drama, he's good at comedy, he had his music thing going on back in the 90s, and he was like this wonderful force. And then, obviously, I'm partial to Kevin. When I heard about the experience, and you know, it's heartbreaking more than anything else to realize that, you know, the guy was I don't know how to really put it into words, but he was less than, it was like basically a paycheck, and he had very little respect for Kevin as the director, and that was sad too, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so that brings me going back a couple steps here. You mentioned we were talking about the Chuli's gum scene. So I'm taking everything that you did on screen there. None of that was improvised, but it was all on script.
None of my dialogue was improvised. But when the riot gets going, Kevin had told the crowd in between takes that they were allowed to shout out things like Walt Flanagan, who I'm sure you're aware of who he is within the Kevin Smith world. Walt began to, pepper things in there, which helped me I didn't really improvise much off of it, but I had the opportunity to have some fun reactions to the crowd because now they were really getting involved, and Walt was getting involved, and you know, he was echoing things, you know, like when I called him a Nazi. When I called him a Nazi.
That's okay. You can swear on here.
Yeah. No, I actually burped.
Okay.
He began to sort of echo me, and that allowed me to react in a different way too, which was fun. But yeah, no, nothing at all was improvised. And like I say, to my knowledge, I mean, I couldn't speak firsthand from films I wasn't on the set of, but just knowing the history and knowing other people well who have worked with him, he didn't really begin to be open to improvisation for quite a number of films because he meticulously writes out everything in a way that he wants it done, and that's, you know, there's nothing wrong with that either.
No. And of course, we got to talk about that lung and stuff. All that stuff dropped off. Talk about the props there that you landed on the counter there that disgusted everybody.
Yeah, you know what's funny, and not funny, or maybe it's ironic, but because he was on a really tight budget shooting film back at a time when that's all there really was. It's long before the digital media explosion of the late 90s up into currently, where people are shooting movies on a phone now. It was film, and film was expensive, which is another reason why it's in black and white to boot, because color film was more expensive, and lighting color film is a much more arduous and technical process, so it's another reason why it's in black and white. But because he didn't have the luxury of a lot of takes, not only did you really have to bring your A game with every take, but he didn't have a lot of cutaway shots, and I always felt it was unfortunate that they put a lot of work into that disgusting lung that I pull out of the bag, but you never get a close-up of it.
No.
You never really see what it was like. You know, I mean, it was just hideous. And like they covered it in dirt, and they stuck They snuffed cigarette butts out in it, and it was really, really filthy. I mean, I had gloves, which was nice. I put on gloves to handle it, but unfortunately, some of that was lost on the fact that you never get a close-up of that actual thing.
Yeah, that was a funny scene. I loved it too when you hand that what was that little piece to that guy, and he kind of flips it. Oh,
the cancer-ridden lung picture.
That's right. Yeah,
Right.
he kind of tosses it down on the counter like he's just disgusted. I like it there at the end too. After all the chaos, he still gets a pack of cigarettes.
Right, that's Walt. That was really, really fun stuff. The scene actually is a little longer and plays out. It doesn't play out differently per se, but it's a little longer and it's edited differently in the director's cut than it is in the Miramax theatrical version. In the director's cut, nothing's cut out, nothing is edited. In the director's cut, they don't cut to Jay and Bob out in front of the store. In the Miramax cut, while the Chuli's Gum guy is losing his mind, at one point you still hear the Chuli's Gum guy ranting, but visually they cut to Jay and Bob out in front of the store. And I think the Nazis or some part of the speech is cut in the Miramax version. All of that made it out to the. It was on the Laserdisc. It was on the Blu-ray ever since. It was also on the box set that came out when it was the 10-year anniversary. But the Miramax cut of the Chuli scene was edited slightly differently and trimmed just a bit, which was it was funny because he had sent us all screeners a bunch of months after we were done, and Kevin finally had a cut that he liked. He had sent the cast a VHS screener, and I got really used to that being the version of the movie. So once I got to see it out in the theaters when it was released by Miramax as, the actual full release, the film was cut a little differently, most notably, too, the ending, which was good because the original ending, Dante was murdered in the original ending.
Mm-hmm.
But the soundtrack was certainly cleaned up and done really nicely, and some things were edited a bit differently than I had gotten used to seeing them on that VHS screener all those months before the film actually came out.
Yeah, I like Kevin Smith. He's got a real passion for what he does, and I still think Clerks just may be my favorite of his films, but he's done so many that I like, and he really made a big thing out of the Silent Bob character. It's become kind of a staple. But you hear him on stage and whatnot, he has more than a few words.
Yeah, he's completely opposite of the Silent Bob character, really. The Kevin himself, and he's talked about how that was more for pragmatics in the beginning. He wanted to get in there, but he didn't have to worry about dialogue because as a director, when you're on camera, just as a director, forget about being on camera. Just you have so much you have to stay focused on at any given time. And then when you put yourself on camera, now you're really upping the ante of how much you have to look after, and it's not always easy, once you're in front of the camera. And then add dialogue to that, and now you really got a huge amount of things you're juggling. So Silent Bob was created to be Silent Bob for a pragmatic reason, but it worked wonderfully as far as the comic duo. And over the years, the character has been groomed to speak at certain critical times.
Yeah, well, I love that there at the end of all of his movies, you always see him kind of sum up something, and it makes perfect sense,
Yeah.
Gives him his big moment. And, of course, he does so at the end of Clerks as well, when he talks about... really comes to the defense of the Veronica character, bringing lasagna. Not all women are going to do that for you.
Right. Yeah. No, that's the first time we see that he will sort of give you a nugget of wisdom. And I'm certainly in Chasing Amy. That's huge. I mean, the Silent Bob character is pretty much explaining the whole story of Chasing Amy at the very end of Chasing Amy, which was fun.
Yeah.
Mallrats, he doesn't speak much at all, I don't think, that I recall. But, and then, of course, in the original Strike Back and Dogma, he was pretty silent but would speak from time to time. Which brings us right on up to the reboot. He's actually, as Silent Bob, he's not saying much, but he's playing. Have you seen the reboot?
The reboot didn't come here, what just
Not
really
yet,
annoys
yeah.
me. Well,
Yeah, no, it'll be there. It's all. I know it's going to hit Canada at some point, and he's going to be going up there because he's touring it with Jay Live, the movie.
oh, okay. Perfect.
So that's coming up there, and then eventually it'll be released in some theaters, and then of course, eventually it'll just be available for streaming and for disc and download and whatnot. But yeah, the reboot is, oh God, we're having so much fun here in the States now because it's really, really caused a great resurgence. So not only do we have the 25th anniversary of the original, but now we've got the reboot, which I don't want to kill any of it for you, but there's cameos by just about anybody who's had a role in any of his other films, and that includes the original Clerks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really exciting for all of us.
Yeah. Well, I doubt there is a cameo by Bruce Willis.
Well, no, yeah. And you also, too, since that's not considered, quote-unquote, part of the View universe, because it's a film he directed that he didn't write, which was rare, and it also had no real connections to the View universe characters, whereas Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Dogma, Strike Back, they all call, Clerks too, they all call out to and use characters from the past. Mm-hmm. So anybody who was part of that universe, most, I'd say 95%, have come back for fun cameos in the reboot, and we're having a ball with it. It's really caused quite a resurgence, which is nice.
Well, Kevin Smith for a while was getting so fed up with the added marketing that went into his film, because he always said his movies would hit like 30 million, but he says when the marketing went in, he said his films weren't pulling in a whole lot. And he thought about stepping away for a while, and then, he comes back with Tusk and Red State, which, I'm going to be frank, quite different for him, but it's kind of interesting to see him tackle movies like that.
I love Red State. I was really excited when I saw Red State because I felt that, he had been trying to reinvent himself like every artist does for quite a while, and he was trying to not, I don't want to say move away from the View Askew universe, but create other things that didn't have to be necessarily always connected to the View Askew universe. As an artist, as a director, he wanted to branch out and try other genres, and Red State did that. I felt like, wow, bravo. I mean, not only did he reinvent himself, but Red State is it's like a cinematic punch in the face. It was a real powerful film, I felt. I thought he did a wonderful job, and I think it's probably one of the most highly underrated films of his career thus far. That's just my opinion, but I thought, wow, all right, big high five. He's really made a splash and reinvented himself with this film. And I mean, it did okay, and it did get respect, and in the canon, it's certainly one of the ones people do talk about as doing just that. I just thought it might have really opened a door for him to, direct other types of film aside from the View Askew universe.
Yeah, well, Michael Parks was brilliant in both.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just lost him not too long ago, too, so Kevin was...
I know, he was quite a powerful actor.
Yeah. Well, Tarantino and Kevin Smith got a lot of great work out of him. But yeah, Kevin, I love it when he does The View Askew, though, and ties everything. It's kind of like Stephen King writing a book. So you're always going to get Maine in there somewhere, you know?
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's there's a lot of filmmakers and a lot of artists who have that approach to it, where everything is interconnected on some level. And what's wonderful about that is if you're really into it, if you're a real supporter of it, then there's so much. It's deep. There's so much you can enjoy and share with other supporters, and when characters sort of float in and out, and then they're mentioned in other films and things of that nature. But like any other artist, he wanted to branch out and grow and have the ability to, carry a project that wasn't necessarily from that world. And Tusk was a very odd one. Tusk,
Yeah.
I really was. I guess I was. That was very unsettling, and because
Yeah.
it's hard not to like Justin Long, for me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, he's playing a character that's pretty unlikable, or pretty much not somebody. He's setting you up for this guy to get sort of his comeuppance, but I think what ends up happening is just so horrifically hard to take. That movie was very unsettling for me, I'll be honest. Out of all of his films, I'm a fan, obviously, and I'm super partial. I love everything he's done. But out of all of them, that one, I'll just say, is the most unsettling, and the one that I feel like, oof, it's to this day. I mean, I've only seen it a few times. It's just it's very unsettling.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, I haven't even been able to work myself up to watch it again.
Yeah, no, it's unsettling. I'm repeating myself here, but I don't know how else
Mm-hmm.
to articulate it. It's some people really, and there was a lot of people that really, really embraced it, and then there were a lot of hardcore Kevin fans that just didn't understand, like, why make something that, and he sort of made it, I don't want to say on a dare, but it started off as just a bizarre notion of a story in a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And then it grew into the film, and it was, so I almost think the story of how that got made is a big part of the film itself. It's interesting. He's had that kind of career. It's like a boutique career. Not many filmmakers have it like that,
Let's talk about Marilyn Gigliotti. I absolutely love her. I'm still in touch with her every now and again. Had her as a guest, and she, of course, has that great scene where she's pointing that fire extinguisher in your direction. She wants to see your credentials. Talk about that.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I don't want to. It's been, I guess, in the documentaries, and people who were really hardcore fans, who really understood, who really have learned how the film was made. And Marilyn herself, I believe, says this all the time, that she didn't really get to fire the extinguisher. And the way, the magic of filmmaking, you might say, she was great on set. I really gravitated to her on set at the time. But the day that had happened, that was an insert shot, so she wasn't actually there for when that blast of what it is a combination of, actually, believe it or not, cigarette smoke and the baby powder. So it's funny. Of course, when she confronts me and sends me packing, obviously she and I were together for that.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual, I didn't see her get up on the. I guess it was like the old school like ice cream counter freezer type of thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She stands up on that and then blasts the crowd. That was more or less done from separate shots, but certainly when she confronts me and throws me out, that was a lot of fun.
That's a great image of her up there with the fire extinguisher. It's one of my favorite shots in the film.
Yeah, it's interesting too because Kevin really, it just shows you, it's another testament to his brain and how sharp he really is. Within the first 5 minutes of the movie, you've got I would say probably you have the most, aside from the hockey game and from the funeral, that's the most action per se in the film. The rest really is a lot of talking, a lot of, conversations, cutting back and forth, and then of course at the end when Dante and Randall have their physical confrontation and destroy the store, that's action as far as visual. But Marilyn, myself, the crowd, the riot, the whipping the unlit cigarettes and all of that he opened the movie up with a tremendous amount of sort of compelling and bizarre action, and you knew, wow, this is okay. It's a little convenience store, but this is going to be a crazy ride.
Mm-hmm.
So that was exciting, and it was wonderful to be a part of that. Like I said earlier, as a character actor, you're looking for that role that if you're not going to get the good fortune of being cast as a lead, when you're a supporting player, you look for that role that will really stand out and somewhat be pivotal, not unlike what I was fortunate to do with Brian O'Halloran in the movie Vulgar.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, yep. But speaking of Brian O'Halloran, who I understand wasn't even supposed to be there today.
Yeah, think about how ironic that original cut of the movie is. He wasn't even supposed to be there, and he died. So that was another reason why it was like the ultimate irony, why Kevin thought it was important to have that happen. But everybody who screened it that was becoming part of the world of supporting the film early on, like John Pearson and Bob Hawke and the folks over at not so much Sundance, but management and things of that nature, said you just can't kill Dante off. We can't end the film on such a horror, such a bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, what was it like working with Brian? I know you've worked with him again in Vulgar.
Well, I'm very fortunate over the last handful of years, mostly over the last 10 or 15 years, we've got to be friends off screen because we do so much convention work together, and we get involved in a lot of other things of that nature, whether it's charity things or whatnot, or special appearances. So I got to know him, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. He's been very good to me. We have a good dynamic, even off screen. But he brought a tremendous professionalism for me on the set of Clerks, because when I showed up for my day of rehearsals, I didn't know what to expect from anybody. I didn't know anybody, there personally. Mm-hmm. And that's another big myth of the film. A lot of people think that everybody in the movie was either a friend of Kevin's or a relative, But that wasn't the case with a lot of people. Well, certainly Brian, Marilyn, Lisa Spoonhour, and myself, we were just actors who auditioned. We didn't know Kevin at all personally. But anyway, I had shown up, and I said to, Brian, okay, would you like to run it? And he was very professional about it, and he wasn't at all, I don't want to say that he wasn't social, but he was so pro that it just made me think, well, okay, this is great. I've definitely got to bring my A game, because this guy isn't, he's taking this very seriously. So I always felt he set a very professional tone for the rest of the actors, because Brian's a fun guy, don't get me wrong, But when it comes to business and the art, the business of acting and the art of shooting a film, especially at that time, because we didn't have the luxury to have a lot of takes, because film was precious. Kevin maybe had the ability to shoot a scene, I think, 3 times the most. That was even a lot. Like, he wanted to get things in the first or second take. So, you know, the pressure was on. It was almost shot like live theater in a sense. So Brian was very, very professional and serious, and I really respected him for that, because it made me think, okay, yeah, we're here, we want to enjoy ourselves and have fun, but this is going to be serious, which I liked, you know, because like I said, I took what I did seriously. I was a little older than a lot of those guys, and initially I wondered, I just hope this doesn't, you know, feel like a rinky-dink kind of like school project. I didn't know what to expect because I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
And I only was given the Chuli's Gum Guy scenes ever. So I didn't know the whole script until I saw the finished movie almost a year later.
Mm-hmm.
I only knew the Chuli's Guy stuff. I didn't know what else happened in the movie until I got to actually see the movie. So I didn't know what to expect, but Brian really quickly kind of took the reins, and I realized this is good. And don't get me wrong, Kevin was super professional too, but you know, Kevin had a lot on his plate, running around worrying about cameras and lighting and everybody else. He really put a lot of faith in me that I would show up, do my thing, and give him 100%, which of course I did. But Brian really was the guy that I interfaced with on the set and practiced with, because obviously I had the most to do with him.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. I've been trying to get Brian on here, you know, and I heard from his representatives, but nothing's been followed up. But
well, let me tell you, he really is a busy guy, and it's not because of anything other than he's constantly spinning a lot of plates, whether it's appearances, conventions. All of us do still work in other films and other projects. I have my recording studio, which is important to me, but Brian really is super busy.
It's funny because he's not supposed to be there either.
He's got to write his memoirs and call it that.
Well, you mentioned Lisa Spoonhour. I know you weren't in scenes with her, but she sadly is gone, you know, passed away. Did you meet her or Jeff Anderson or Jason Mewes while you were there?
Jason, I didn't have any real time with or connection to. He was only there when he had to do his stuff, and that was it. And we all know the stories of him back then. He really was the youngest out of everyone, and he was doing it, I don't want to say under the gun, but because it was so new to him and so crazy, and he never fancied himself an actor. He was super nervous. He didn't want anybody to be around when he shot his stuff. So I didn't have any real interaction with Jay back then. Lisa, yes. Lisa was on the set when I was there. And she was a doll, and she was super hot in person. Let me tell you, brother.
Yeah.
Marilyn was too. I mean, you have a tendency to develop what I call talent crushes on the set, and both of them were really sweet and very attractive in person.
Yeah.
I actually, you know, Lisa. You've probably heard the stories, but Lisa kind of got out of the acting fairly early on. But she was a sweetheart, and just a handful of months before we lost her, I had been talking with her back and forth on social media. I was going to get together with her. I do a lot of work with an animal rescue, and all of my peers, Brian and Marilyn and Jay and Bob, Kevin and Jay, and even Jeff now has gotten in the mix recently. I do a lot of signings for my animal charity, and I have a special item that's been signed by everybody in the cast of Clerks, everybody in the cast of Comic Book Men, and Lisa was the last person I wanted to get to sign it. And we had been talking back and forth, and then, from time to time she'd drop out of contact because of her battles. She had a lot of health issues. It was very sad, but she had an amazing attitude and was one of the sweetest people ever. So, unfortunately, she passed away while I was kind of talking with her back and forth about we were going to get together for lunch somewhere in New Jersey at that point, but that was terrible. That was just so heartbreaking. It's such a shock. We knew she had battled a lot of health issues, but she would get really stable for a while, but that was just horrible. Yeah.
What about Jeff Anderson?
Jeff, Jeff to this very day, I don't know if I even. He wasn't there when I shot my stuff. And again, I was coming from pretty far away. I was about an hour and a half, 45 minutes away from those guys. So back then, if I didn't have a rehearsal or if we weren't shooting, I didn't just go show up and hang around. Mm-hmm. So I never really got to spend much time around Jeff. Okay. I had my own family crisis when Lisa had her. It's sad to talk about, but when she was during her wake and her funeral, a bunch of us planned, not only to go, but we would see each other there. But my dad, who is, quite up there in age, he was starting to go MIA every now and then. And that same weekend, he had gone MIA, and it caused a lot of chaos for me. So I, unfortunately, had to miss Lisa's wake. But I would have seen Jeff there. But I have very little interaction ever with Jeff.
Okay. Well, do you remember the premiere of the film, or were you at that?
Say it again?
Do you remember the premiere of the film, or were you at that?
Oh, God. Well, I have a lot of drama stories from back then. I actually almost missed the audition because I had gone down there early, which was my way. I was always early for everything. I still am. I'm pretty much OCD guy. I'd sooner be a half hour early than even 5 minutes late. Mm-hmm. And I was, it was a shore town, and the shore was not far from the theater where the auditions were. So, and it was the off season, and I had gone out on a jetty, and I was rehearsing. I was just getting warmed up, doing my stuff. And I guess from the beach, it looked like there was like a lunatic out on the jetty, who might have been either drunk or maybe going to do something, maybe off himself or whatever, because I was gesturing wildly and just doing my thing. So when I came, they called me in. Somebody called like security. And I said, no, listen, I'm very sorry. I won't. If you're going to arrest me, can you do it after the audition, please? There's an audition just up the block. And when they heard the story, they realized, okay, this guy's serious. And I was also not inebriated. But I have a long history with alcohol and drug abuse. Thankfully, I'm sober now a good handful of years. And, this past 4th of July, I was 13 years without any booze or illicit drugs. But I've had a pretty rough past with that. And during the time of the late 80s and most of the 90s, I was battling back and forth with that. But I had actually missed the premiere, the New York premiere of the film, because I ended up in a rehab against my will out of the state of New Jersey during the premiere. Okay. So, no, a long story short, I wasn't at the New York premiere, and that's something that I deeply regret to this day. But it was what it was. I spoke to Kevin and I spoke to Scott Mosier from the place where I was. And they said, listen, man, just take care of yourself. There'll be other premieres. You're here. You're on screen. That's all that matters. Because I was thinking of hitchhiking out of the rehab because I was there against my will. It's a long story. But I kind of came out of a blackout. And when I came out of the blackout, I was in Pennsylvania in a intensive care unit. And I was actually having my last rites read to me.
Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't, it was a mess. But no, unfortunately I missed the premiere.
Well, let's move on to some of your other films I want to bring up here, and then eventually your music here. But do we have the Broccoli Theory? I have not seen this film, but you're in this film with Selma Blair. You have any? Yes, it's pretzel cart lesbian they got her billed as. And you're Eric.
Yeah. Pretzel cart lesbian.
Yeah, that's what they on IMDb.
Right. Yeah, that was a wonderful shoot. I didn't get to actually work with Selma per se, and of course that was Selma before she became Selma. Obviously, that's like one of her first films.
Mm-hmm.
And that film, I don't believe, was ever commercially released. I think it only played festivals, just like another film I did, which was a real heartbreaker. I did a movie called Zero Stress, a.k.a. they also called it The Garden State. This is before Zach Braff's Garden State, long before. This was in the mid to late 90s, and there's a lot of fabulous actors in there that've gone on to do a lot of other work, but most notably Michael DiLorenzo, who has been around for the last 3 decades, working steadily. He was in New York Undercover at the time we shot this movie, and I got to kind of be, he and I were like sidekicks in this movie. It was sort of a mobster spoof, and it was a big deal at the time. 35 millimeter, some named people, all of my scenes. I'm playing opposite a guy who was on one of the hottest TV shows at the time, and that was super exciting. But unfortunately, that film was never properly commercially released. So that was another, after Clerks, I got really lucky with Clerks, and then after that, there were a handful of things that I really thought would help escalate me to another level. And then because of how wacky the business is, things happened to where that didn't actually happen. I have clips of all those things on different social media, YouTube, you could find it, and all over my social media. I talk about it from time to time, but none of it wasn't commercially released. And then I got Vulgar, which was commercially released, thankfully, and I had a nice opportunity to work opposite Brian O'Halloran again and work with Brian Johnson, who's a real he's certainly a interesting, creative, and the Randall character is actually based on him.
Okay.
Brian Johnson, who's a good friend of Kevin Smith's, and that's the one film he wrote and directed. And he's been talking about a possible sequel to it for a while, so we'll see about that. But, then there was a long string of indie films. A lot of them went, which became popular. They were either released straight to streaming or right to DVD over the years. And then I was fortunate to not only be in the cast of a lot of them, but I was working on the music and the score to a lot of them. So, thanks to indie film and thanks to technology opening up the doors to a lot of different streaming platforms, there's a lot of work out there, and I got a chance to continue on. And I feel blessed, because a lot of actors struggle and maybe never get past that dinner theater thing,
Well, it's interesting because Vulgar was done by a lot of the View Askew people. You had a lot of them involved. Oh, right, yeah. No, there's as far as the View Askew universe goes, there's a lot of characters in there. They're not the same characters. They're not, so they're not crossover, but it's a lot of the same cast. Obviously, you've got Brian as the lead. Mm-hmm. Jay Muse is in it as well. I'm in it. David Klein is in it. Kevin's in it. I think that's the first time you ever see Kevin act as any other character other than Silent Bob. Okay.
I'm almost positive. And when I saw him play the TV executive in that, I thought, wow. I said, Kevin Kevin as his own comic actor, and then later, a handful of years later, we'd see he would go that route in a couple other films for a while. He was in, and I always forget the name of this film, but I love it, with Jennifer Garner.
Okay.
Oh, what was the name of that film? I always forget the name of that film. But he was like the comedic relief in the film with Jennifer Garner, and that was a fairly well-received film, and he got a lot of nice notices just as an actor.
Yeah.
But, I feel fortunate. I have a lot of different avenues between the music, the acting. I had the book that came out a handful of years ago that still gets a little bit of a reaction, and is still out there floating around. But we stay busy. I know I do. I stay as busy as I can.
Yeah, and you were in Creepy Tales, Girls' Night Out.
Right, Creepy. I did a couple of films with that director as well. I did Creepy Tales, Girls' Night Out, and then Idiots Are Us, which was a really wonderful experience because as an indie comedy, it took Best Independent Comedy at the New York International Film Festival back in 2006 or so, and that was a pretty exciting thing because we're talking about a film that was really not only low budget, but there were we had no real name stars in it per se, but the audience reaction to the film was so wonderful. I sat way in the back, and I just wanted to watch an audience watch it, and they really, really enjoyed it and laughed, and what a gratifying feeling. But I never dreamed we would win because the New York Festival was huge. I mean, we were up against easily 24 other comedies, a few that I got to see, which were really good. And I'd never fathomed we'd win, but we did win. And Idiots Are Us holds a pretty dear place for me as far as my resume. There's another film called Linger, which, as a drama, is probably my favorite to date because I don't get an opportunity to do a lot of serious fare per se. I do get cast in a lot of comedies, and I'm usually like some kind of loudmouth jerk. So I've been very fortunate. Anybody who has the inclination to look over my resume.
Well, you're in Jay and Silent Bob reboot.
Well, that's a wonderful thing, and I don't want to kill it for you per se. You're going to eventually see it because how we all pop in is kind of a really fun, surprising cameo.
Sure, yeah. Well, let's talk about your music. Talk about, number one, did you always want to do acting first, or was music always your first passion? Which was it, or were they both kind of intertwined?
They became intertwined in my 20s, but music was absolutely the first thing. And I mean, from the time I could barely, I honestly think I knew who the four Beatles were, and I could tell you their names before I knew a lot of my own relatives. I had an older cousin who I miss him dearly. He passed away young, but he exposed, because I grew up with a single mother, so he was kind of like a pseudo father figure. But he would bring home every weekend, and I spent a lot of weekends at my aunt's house because my mother worked for my aunt at the time. And he would bring home all the new records of the day, and we're talking, that was Sgt. Pepper and the White Album and Otis Redding and the Rolling Stones and whatnot. So I grew up with all the classic music, classic rock music, and I grew up with a real love for music. And all I wanted to do was play an instrument and be in a band. I mean, and I'm like 6 or 7 years old. So music was the first real passion for me. And then my mother was very supportive and got me the guitar and got me lessons. And, by the time I was in high school, I got pretty good at it. And by the time I was in college, I was, pretty accomplished as a musician in the sense of I could play with just about anybody. So I was doing studio work and playing club gigs, and had the project studio, which I still have to this day. Which music to me is like, it's hard to articulate. It's like air. It's like breathing. Like I could not even picture what life might be like without music. I love music in such an organic thing. The fact that I was able to use my musical studio and knowledge to stay active in film was really a blessing. I got the acting bug in high school, but I really loved film and always have. I loved film, and obviously some television, but I loved the medium of film from a young age. And I say that because I didn't really put much energy ever into theater, which a lot of actors do, and they swear by. And, you'll hear a lot of actors say, well, the theater is really the actor's medium and film is the director's medium. I don't agree with that per se. They're very different is all. I respect theater actors like the day is long. I know what goes into that, all the energy and the passion and the time and the commitment and the reality of when you hit that stage, there is no cut and let's redo it. I've done some theater, but my love has always been in film. I think film as a medium just blows my mind. So I was fortunate to get into film acting as a character actor, and a lot of it's thanks to Clerks being successful. But then I was able to bring the music in by doing film music for a lot of indie films that I was either cast in, and then once I began to get a little more work under my belt, I would work mostly through references. So I ended up having a small sort of stable of independent filmmakers that would come to me when they needed either score, or I might be one of the first people they thought of when it came time to read for a role. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful ride, I'm not married. I don't have any children. That was a pretty conscious decision over the years, although during all the alcohol and drug years, that just happened as a result of that and I'm thankful I did not get a family wrapped up in my addiction, because my alcoholism and drug addiction for quite a lot of years was a really horrific thing. I won't underplay it. My sympathies go out to people who continue to suffer with addiction. It's a horrible thing. I'm very fortunate to be on the other side now, thankfully, many years. But it's always just been me, and I certainly have family, and I have people in my life that are dear to me. There's a woman in my life that is about as close to a wife as I'll ever get. But the point I'm making is, financially, I was able to live a sort of feast or famine life, and it didn't affect the family, because I probably could not have stayed in it to the level that I did had I had to support a family, because there were some lean times and then there were some great times. But during the lean times, I would be the only one to suffer per se. So it's been an interesting run, but I feel blessed. And then I went on. I actually got a master's degree. I graduated 2016 with a master's degree in professional mental health counseling, of all things, because I have such a sort of passion and attraction to behavior, human behavior. I love studying it. I'm fascinated by it. In my own behavior as well as anybody else's behavior. And I've been in therapy a huge portion of my life, certainly with all the addiction issues I've had. So it's been a wonderful run so far, and luckily things are constantly moving and looking up. I have a handful of projects came out this year, a bunch of things next year. So I'm very fortunate. I feel very blessed. And a lot of it all lies on that crazy little black and white film from 1994.
Well, I'm looking at your webpage here, and it says that you played guitar, bass, keyboards, and harmonica. Do you have a favorite of those?
Guitar.
Guitar.
Guitar, hands down, would be the one that I, spent not only the most time playing, but the one that I, have the deepest passion for. Keyboards are a wonderful, for me, they're more of a tool for composing. Harmonica is a lot of fun, obviously. I play a little bit of drums, but when it comes time to studio work, I get a quote-unquote real drummer because, I can play, but I'm certainly not accomplished enough to where I would want to put myself on a record, although I'm doing a bunch of demos now where I'm playing everything. But while we're on the music thing, I just want to quickly note there's a CD, an album called Little Did I Think by somebody named Jewel Carey, who happens to be my partner in crime in my life. But she's a wonderful singer-songwriter. We met in the studio, and I produced and recorded her first album called Little Did I Think, which is quite a while back now, but it's classic rock, so it's fairly timeless.
Okay.
That's out there, and a lot of that music, thanks to my film connections, has been placed in indie films over the years. So I can't say it enough. I'm very blessed to have the life I have. It's a modest life overall, but it's filled with a lot of wonderful perks. This year we all got to go to London for the Clerks' 25th anniversary, which was, for me, a kid who grew up with the British invasion, just a mind blower. I could never treat myself per se. I could, but it was really stretched financially. I would not be taking trips to Europe, but because of Clerks, I get to go, not only earn money, but the trip is covered. It's just a blessing on so many levels,
Yes. Now, you mentioned, of course, I always get people to plug charities on here. You have a fascination with animals, is that right?
Well, thanks to Jewel Carey, a.k.a. Carrie Warner, who is my better half. I love animals, yes, but she really, over the last 2 decades of our lives together, has brought out a love of animals because she loves animals. She's got a green thumb. She's got me to appreciate nature, but because I grew up a kid who I just love everything city. I'm not a nature guy. The last thing I would do is go camping, hiking in the woods. I'm not a beach guy. I don't swim. I love being in the studio or out in New York City, out in the concrete. Give me concrete. Don't give me wilderness. I love the great indoors. And if I'm outside, I love city life. But she gave me an appreciation for a lot of other things. But definitely animals, any animal. I can't even kill a bug now because of Carrie.
Yeah.
If there's a bug or a spider in my studio, I try to capture it, save it, and bring it outside. It's pretty crazy. But the Angels of Animals is the charity here in Bergen County, New Jersey, that I work closely with. There's a link off of my webpage where you can purchase at a very reasonable cost signed memorabilia from all the films, from a lot of other people in the films as well. Brian O'Halloran, Marilyn Gigliotti is part of that. Jay and Bob have signed a bunch of things for me. The Comic Book Men have signed a bunch of things for me. All of my merch is available there, signed, and the money goes to Angels of Animals.
Okay. Wow, that is a great charity. I've had a number of guests on here that are into animal charities, and me, I have a cat myself, so I certainly get the love for animals, and yeah. You got any other charities that you're involved in, or is that the big one?
That's the main one that I do the signings for. But it's funny. As you get older, I think, I don't know, at least for me, you stop even though I don't have children, like I say.
I don't have them either, and I don't want them, and I'm
Yeah, I
single as
never
well.
did.
Yep,
I
same
knew I
here.
would not be a good parent, and I didn't, my mother was a wonderful, wonderful person. I miss her and loved her to death. My dad I've gotten close to over the last handful of years, but he and I were pretty estranged. But I just, I wasn't a family type person,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd ever sort of coveted, oh gosh, marriage and children, marriage, and it's like that was like the furthest thing from my mind or what I thought would be an optimum life.
Mm-hmm.
But the point I'm making is, as I'm getting older, whether you have children or not, you realize, you become less important, and other people, no matter what, especially people who are suffering, or they become important. Your fellows are important,
Mm-hmm.
and animals, because animals can't speak for themselves. I felt that was a great way to get involved. But there's a lot of people who are oppressed, and there's a lot of children who sadly they can't speak for themselves in a sense, and they're being oppressed, whether they're in an abusive household or whatever. So I've looked into some other things to get involved with, but it's not easy as far as when you ask people to dip into their wallets for a charity. You're asking a lot in a lot of ways. I realize that everybody's got their nut to cover and their lives to worry about, which is why I made it for the animals that 95% of what's brought in through that can go right to the animals, because the rest I'm covering, whether it's the price of a movie, the price, and I mean a DVD, the physical price of that DVD, or the 8x10s are certainly inexpensive to have
Mm-hmm.
printed. So when Marilyn and Brian and I sign one, that's all money that goes right to the animals. But as far as getting involved with other things, I've looked into it, and I'm not sure what it might be, but I also feel maybe keeping my energy in the one may be the smartest move.
Well, so it's Angels of Animals. That's what they call that?
That's what it's called, Angels of
Okay.
Animals. They're based out of Clifton, New Jersey.
Perfect.
You could see, if you go to scottschiaffo.com, there's a link to the merch page, which is all for the animals. And from time to time, I do it on my Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram when I can. But the page is up 24/7. So if somebody wanted to grab a copy of my book signed, as opposed to buying it from Amazon, if you get it through that page, that money's going to the animals.
Okay. Well, you mind if I add you on Facebook?
Oh no, yeah, that's fine by me.
Sure.
It's
All right, I'll
one
do
big
that.
happy family there.
Okay. Plug your webpage, because I'm looking right at it. It's a beautiful setup with the green and the black and the white lettering, and you get the black and white pictures. It's a great webpage on here.
Yeah, I've got. It's changed over the years. If you go to scottschiaffo.com now, there's just one main page with links to just about anything and everything you might need or want to know about what's going on with me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no longer. There's an older archived website, which is the one I think you may be looking at, which is fine. But now it's one main page. It's kind of got like a gold page with all the links to YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, IMDb. So anything that's pertinent, that's up to date, would be linked off of that page.
Okay.
And the Angels of Animals are linked off of that page. Social media has allowed us to really, the .com, the dedicated .com, isn't as necessary or powerful as social media, because everybody's on social media.
Mm-hmm.
To have somebody just seek out your .com and then spend time on your .com, it's kind of a different internet world now than it was 20 years ago.
Okay. Well, here's a question I ask all my guests, and I always get some interesting answers, and I want to hear yours. When you do the conventions, what's the most interesting thing you've ever been asked to sign?
That I've been asked to sign?
Yeah.
Well, body parts. So, you know where that goes. There's been a few women who've wanted, their upper breast or the top end of a butt cheek. So that's been probably the oddest and most interesting. But let me tell you, Kevin Smith fans are really amazing. I rarely run into anybody who's anything other than just really down to earth and supportive and respectful. I once had a couple, and as they were approaching the table, they were heavily tattooed and heavily pierced, and so I knew they were edgy, rockin' people. But they came over and they were gushing over the movie Vulgar, like one of their favorite all-time movies. Travis Lee, one of their favorite all-time characters, which all of that in and of itself is a little scary and weird. But again, I would never judge, and I'm thankful for whoever supports. But to be that psyched up about a person who's, Travis Lee is basically a pretty horrible guy. I mean, he's just a domestic violent person who's, beats his wife and he takes his child hostage. I mean, he's a pretty nasty guy. For that to be your favorite character. Now, I realize some people say that just to be supportive of you at the time, but I really feel like they kind of sort of meant it maybe in a deeper way. And they were like, well, listen, please, you got to take a picture with my wife in your lap and whatnot. And, it was fun, but it was a little awkward and odd at first. So that's probably just the weirdest it ever got, because everybody else, 9 times out of 10, they're just huge Kevin fans, and they just want to have a nice little interaction. And so, yeah.
The breast and butt cheek people, I guarantee you those are not the days where Brian O'Halloran says, I'm not supposed to be. Those are the days he's supposed to be there.
I know he's had some strange requests. So he has. I mean, you know what? I don't want to share it, because there's a very good chance you'll probably get to speak with him or interview him sometime in the future. I will definitely reach out to him and tell him about you.
Sure.
And see if it helps the cause. But he is super busy. But if you ask him, you're going to get a really funny story, because he shares that story at conventions from time to time. And I'm going to save it because it's a great story.
That's
Brian
all right.
is
Sure.
really a funny guy. He's very entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Well, love that. And I just started doing the conventions 2 years ago. I had a Canadian actress invite me to Toronto to Horrorama, and it was the first time I've been out in New Brunswick here.
Yeah.
Yep, and with everything with 9/11 and whatnot, I was kind of reluctant to get on a plane, but it's kind of like when I'm invited by an actress to go assist her at her table at a convention, it's like, I'm going to chance it.
Sure. No, it's a fun experience.
It was.
It really is.
And I'm about to make my 3rd trip to Toronto for Horrorama, and I'm going to stay longer this time just to experience, because I live here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, but I get off the plane to Toronto, and the buildings are so much bigger than here. It was just a
Sure. Traveling's exciting. I can tell you, I didn't do a lot of traveling as a younger man. It wasn't something that I was all that interested in. Again, in my younger years, I was interested in where's the party. That was really it. But I've gotten an opportunity to do a lot of traveling in the last 10 years, thanks to Clerks, and I love it. I love getting to meet people, in different parts of my country, and I got to go to Europe this year, and traveling is a lot of fun. You know, I'm not a big fan of flying, but it's worth it. And, you know, life is short, and as far as I know, this is the only one I'm getting. So, yeah, you got to sometimes go outside that comfort zone to really enjoy other things. Greg, I don't want to be a...
Yeah, I know. I'm about ready to close off for you, you know.
Good, okay.
Yep. Yeah, I know you got some Chuli's gum to sell.
Yeah, got to sell that gum, man.
Okay, well, you know what? Before I let you go, I was wondering if I could get you to do a plug for my show.
Sure. Hey, folks, my name is Scott Schiaffo, actor, musician, author, best known to you indie film fans as the Chuli's Gum Guy from Kevin Smith's film Clerks, Travis Lee from Brian Johnson's film Vulgar, and a handful of other films that you probably aren't going to get to see unless you're up way too late or you like DVDs. You are listening to the most awesome Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise out of New Brunswick, Canada.
You ever been out to New Brunswick before? Because you seem to know that there was an hour between us.
No, I just did a quick Google on it, you know, for both our sake to see what the time difference was. But I have a really bizarre story. I can't get into it too much detail, but I'll tell you. I was supposed to do the Cape show, which is out of Cornwall, about 3 years ago, and it turned out I had a problem I didn't even know about at the border. They wouldn't let me in the country, so I couldn't do the show. I came home. I fixed all my issues. It was something from 30 years ago that just needed like a T crossed or an I dotted. But Canada's tough, boy. If they find anything they're not thrilled about in your history, you're not getting in. So, but now I could get in. I went to celebrate. Brian took me to dinner in Montreal. So, yes, I could get into your country now. But I was invited to the Cornwall Pop Festival a few years back, and I couldn't get in.
Well, you're welcome anytime, as far as I'm concerned, man. So, and
That's great. Yeah, I'm hoping to get out there.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on here today and celebrating 25 years of Clerks. You have yourself
you got it, Craig.
Yes, you have yourself a wonderful day, and you take care, and God bless.
You too.
Bye-bye.